can't kill Nintendo. Nintendo will live on. Sega tried to kill Nintendo, but they failed as they were BTF. Oh. Sony tried to kill Nintendo, but they failed as the low times were a bunch of crap. Xbox tried to kill Nintendo. They failed as they had no Japan sales.
So the Xbox showcase was a load of crap, right? Not surprising anyone, but right now, like, game journals and YouTubers are trying to come out and say it was great. They're probably trying to do a pendulum shift thing, the way this typically works is that people realize that Xbox or PlayStation are garbage, and they just switch over to the other one, right? This has been happening since the 90s. But now we're in dangerous territory where people are beginning to realize that Nintendo is better than both. And once that happens, there will be no recovery for the gaming sphere, right? Gaming journals have to keep people locked into the two console system. They have to keep jumping between PlayStation and Xbox to continue supporting the toxic third-party developers that have been enabling them for the past 30 years. Again, it's all a conspiracy, bro. Like, this has been very well documented. It's real, is what I'm getting at. But again, there have been a couple of really interesting things in regards to the Xbox showcase that I do feel like I need to talk about. Doom, clearly out of ideas. Like I said this when they made Eternal, right? Like, it really does feel as if the creators have no idea how to proceed going forward, right? Like, Doom Eternal felt nothing like classic Doom, and the Dark Ages seems even more of a regression, right? It just seems even less like Doom than it was before. And I keep getting flack for saying this, but Doom is an IP that really has lost its identity and really has no business continuing to be made and supported, right? Like, I was so frustrated with the sheer amount of people who try and tell you that Doom Eternal and even Doom 2016 were great games, some of the best we've gotten in recent years, when in reality they're nothing special and nothing worth talking about. I greatly dislike the hype and enthusiasm these games get. But anyway, that has been a commonly stated opinion of mine. People know this, like how I feel about Doom. What do I feel about Perfect Dark, right? Because this is an interesting IP. Started on Nintendo hardware, Rareware, one of the last great N64 games, better than Halo Combat Involved, right? Perfect Dark was an interesting game because it really showcases just how Halo destroyed the FPS genre. Because we went from, like, cool, innovative, creative level design and mechanics in FPS games, with Perfect Dark, to some of the most generic, uninspired slop imaginable 9 months later in Halo, right? The original Perfect Dark is an absolute classic and is often overlooked purely because Halo came onto the scene on a new console, like, not long after its release, right? Objectively speaking, Perfect Dark is better with much more interesting mechanics. It respects your intelligence more. I've talked more about GoldenEye over the years because I'm much more familiar with it, but there's no denying that Perfect Dark was a cut above the rest of the FPS industry for a very, very long time, and honestly probably still is in a lot of ways. But then you have Zero, right? Which I think, more than any other game in existence, really demonstrates just how incompetent Microsoft actually was in handling Rareware. Because they were handed this, like, golden IP that would really suit the Xbox brand, right? That was really catered to them. with their demographics and what they want to do, like mature games for mature gamers. And what do? They change the art style, they change the character, they completely botch like everything that they had going for them in the original release. Like Perfect Dark Zero, people forget this, but Perfect Dark Zero was not well received when it came out. And for good reason, right? Like, no fan of Perfect Dark was enthusiastic about it, and nobody who new players didn't really find it like all that interesting compared to Call of Duty or all the other FPS titles that were coming out along that time, right? So Perfect Dark Zero was a huge flop and was a big part in why Rareware began to be seen as like a shell of its former self by the mid 2000s, right? Like Perfect Dark Zero was a failure, right? The reason I bring this up, the reason I'm so passionate about this is because right now, e-grifters and the conservative, the censorship, well, maybe we shouldn't call them conservative, the censor shitters, right? The people who are like blaming DEI for all the problems in the gaming sphere, they're coming out trying to say like, Joanna Dark isn't attractive anymore. Ah, man, she's not sexy. Yeah, she wasn't in the original game that people actually liked. She had a more realistic design that was more in tone with what the creators wanted to do. Again, you would know this if you were actually familiar with the original Perfect Dark. You would understand that Zero completely ruined the character and over sexualized her, right? Like it's crazy like looking at Zero and just seeing how ridiculous the character design actually is. She has like perfectly long like nails and shit like that, like painted nails. Like it's like, come on, bro. Like, come on. And nobody liked the design then, right? So to see people try and like come back and cope and try to say that like, well, oh no, this is what character designs look like 19 years ago. Yeah, it was embarrassing then. That is the long and short of it. The reason why we don't get characters like this anymore is because it's embarrassing, right? Like you should go into creating female characters with more in mind than simple sexualization, right? You know, Joanna Dark was a more likable character in the first game, and you would know this if you had actually played both. But none of these people have. None of these people know anything about Perfect Dark. And, I'm far from an expert myself, but like even I know that much, like even I know that like Perfect Dark Zero is not the golden age of FPS titles. If anything, like Zero is like the beginning of the end, right? Because it ushered in like the Xbox 360 era. It killed Rareware, one of the greatest studios in gaming history, right? Like again, like when I think back on Perfect Dark Zero and everything it did, like I don't have fond, happy memories of it. Like it was the beginning of the decline, which has nothing to do with DEI or the wokeification of gamer culture, but because like developers were no longer putting out good, interesting video games. That was true even back then. With the Microsoft acquisition, the problem was not the women in gaming. The problem was Microsoft not knowing how to manage a company they had acquired, right? And history repeats itself. We're seeing that happen more and more with all these other games that are getting announced. Fable and Dragon Age and everything else. Like, none of this looks good. And yet, like right now, you're seeing people like refuse to acknowledge it. They're doing everything in their power to try and pretend this was a great showcase and that Xbox is going to save gaming. But in reality, this is yet another disappointment in a long line of disappointments.